Carroll O'Connor was one of television's biggest stars. He was famous everywhere, both when the cameras were rolling and when they weren't. But behind all the fame and his amazing performances, there was something eating at him. It wasn't just a small disagreement or a personality clash. This was something much deeper and more personal. For many years, fans had no idea this problem even existed. Carroll never said this person's name in public again. When everything was over, his silence told the whole story. The magic behind All in the Family. Before there was tension and silence, there was something special happening. In the early 1970s, a bold new TV show appeared and changed American culture forever. That show was All in the Family, and Carroll O'Connor was at the center of it all, playing the memorable character Archie Bunker. People loved watching him right away. Archie was rough around the edges, loud and stuck in his old ways, but somehow he felt like a real person. Working opposite Carroll was a younger actor with a sharp wit who was perfect for arguing with Archie. Their back-and-forth conversations were more than just funny. They were electric. Viewers couldn't get enough of their arguments, their debates, and those unexpected moments when they actually connected. On screen, it was pure magic. What most people didn't know at the time was how much their TV characters reflected the real tension that was building behind the scenes. In public, they seemed to get along fine. They joked around at press events and said nice things about each other in interviews. But according to several people who worked on the show, there was an uncomfortable feeling between them almost from the very beginning. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was definitely there. Some people say it started during rehearsals when they began disagreeing about creative decisions. Others think it was personal from the start. Two very different people from very different backgrounds trying to work together while the whole country was watching. Carroll was an experienced actor with classical training and decades of experience. His co-star was still early in his career but brought fresh energy to the show, along with strong opinions and a sharp tongue. As the show became more and more popular, the differences between the two stars became more obvious. They had different ways of working, different goals, and different ideas about what All in the Family should ultimately be. While they both managed to keep things professional for a while, that quiet tension never really disappeared. What started as creative disagreements would slowly turn into something much more personal. Growing tensions on set. From the outside, All in the Family looked like everything was running smoothly. Week after week, it delivered laughs, made headlines, and broke ratings records. But behind all the laughter was a set full of strong opinions, high expectations, and two leading men who rarely agreed on anything, no matter how well they performed together on camera. Carroll O'Connor was known for being very detailed and careful about his work. He believed in creating deep characters, perfect timing, and meaningful storytelling. Every word mattered to him. Every pause had a purpose. He didn't just memorize his lines. He studied them, changed them when needed, and made them better. The writers respected him, but they also knew he wasn't afraid to speak up when something didn't feel right. His younger co-star was different. He was more relaxed, more reactive, and definitely more vocal about the direction he thought the show should go. While Carroll wanted to stay true to the character-driven roots of the series, his co-star was increasingly interested in using the show as a platform to make bigger statements about society. He had lots of ideas, but those ideas sometimes clashed with Carroll's vision of what the show was supposed to be. One crew member remembered an incident where Carroll asked for a scene to be rewritten because he felt it was too broad or too preachy. But his co-star insisted it should stay exactly as it was written. The disagreement wasn't loud, but both men were firm about their positions. When the episode aired, some people noticed that the final version leaned more toward the younger actor's approach than Carroll's. It was subtle, but to Carroll, it was part of a pattern. According to people who worked on the set, it started with small things. Casual comments during table reads, disagreements about a line or a joke, but it got worse over time. There were moments when Carroll felt his co-star wasn't respecting the heart of the show, or worse, was twisting it into something it was never meant to be. At one point, Carroll even threatened to quit the series because he was frustrated with how episodes were being handled. He never mentioned specific names, but many people believed they knew who he was talking about. Other cast members like Gene Stapleton and Sally Struthers often found themselves caught in the middle, doing their best to calm things down, but even they couldn't always fix the divide. Carroll put deep emotional investment into every scene. When his co-star played things too casually or improvised during live tapings, it threw off Carroll's rhythm. For someone like Carroll, who built each moment with careful purpose, that wasn't just distracting. It was disruptive. Despite all this, neither man ever let the problems show on camera. Their performances remained perfect, and their timing was always sharp. Viewers would never have guessed that some scenes were filmed just moments after heated disagreements. But the tension was there, building with each season that passed. Carroll became more guarded. His co-star became more outspoken. And although they never had a completely falling out, at least not publicly, their relationship had clearly changed. The breaking point. For years, the tension between Carroll O'Connor and his co-star simmered quietly, never boiling over, but never cooling down either. Then came the moment that many people believe changed everything. It was subtle. No dramatic confrontation, no slamming doors, just a few words spoken in public that left a deep wound. During an interview, Carroll's co-star was asked about the show's impact and what their characters meant. At first, his response seemed normal, but then something shifted. He began to distance himself from the character of Archie Bunker and, by extension, from Carroll himself. He described Archie not just as flawed, but as dangerous, a relic of old thinking that should never be admired or sympathized with. It might not have sounded like much to most people, but to Carroll, it felt like a slap in the face. People close to him said he took it very personally. To the audience, Archie was just a fictional character, but to Carroll, Archie was a carefully crafted portrayal, layered, deliberate, and human. He never saw the character as a hero, but he also never saw him as a villain. Archie Bunker was meant to be a mirror for society, not a monster. Hearing his co-star describe Archie in such harsh terms felt like more than just criticism to Carroll. It felt like betrayal. Even worse, the comments were picked up by newspapers and TV outlets across the country. Headlines hinted at brewing disagreements between the stars. While Carroll never publicly responded, he was quietly furious. Friends say he felt ambushed, especially since his co-star had built his career working alongside Carroll, playing off Archie's energy and complexity. It felt like an erasure of everything they had built together. Even worse, Carroll believed those comments blurred the line between the character and the actor who played him. Whispers started. Quiet but persistent rumors that Carroll agreed with Archie's more controversial views. Carroll denied it, of course, over and over, but the damage was done. That quiet distance between the two men became something colder, something Carroll carried with him long after the series ended. In private conversations with trusted friends, Carroll reportedly said his co-star knew what Archie was really about and had helped shape the character, but now he was acting like it was poison. That sense of betrayal, of being left to defend the character alone, stayed with Carroll for years. Even when people asked him about it later, Carroll never brought up the incident directly, but his tone changed whenever the topic came close. Friends noticed the difference. Carroll stopped mentioning his co-star in interviews. During reunions and retrospectives, he became noticeably tight-lipped. He would praise others, writers, producers, even guest actors, but not him. Not anymore. Separate paths. When All in the Family finally ended, it marked the close of an era. Millions of viewers had followed the Bunkers for years, laughing, arguing, and growing along with them. But as the lights faded and the soundstage emptied, Carroll O'Connor and his co-star went in completely different directions, both professionally and personally. Carroll remained deeply connected to the character of Archie Bunker. Even when the show continued as Archie Bunker's Place, he stayed committed. The world might have been changing, but he still believed in telling stories rooted in raw, uncomfortable honesty. He wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing impact. Though he took on other roles later in life, most notably in the Heat of the Night, the shadow of Archie never quite left him. It was a character that defined him, for better or worse. Meanwhile, his former co-star seemed to change direction, almost overnight. He stepped away from acting and dove into directing, and not just small projects. He quickly became one of the most respected filmmakers of his generation, creating massive hits and earning widespread acclaim for his work behind the camera. Yet in all the interviews, retrospectives, and documentaries about his rising career, Carroll's name was barely ever mentioned. The man who had once stood beside him scene after scene was almost completely left out of the story. Carroll noticed, and it hurt. At award shows when All in the Family was honored or referenced, Carroll would warmly mention Gene Stapleton, Norman Lear, and others who helped shape the show's legacy. But he never spoke his co-star's name. Not once. It wasn't just an oversight, it felt intentional. When reporters asked about it, Carroll would politely steer the conversation elsewhere. He never insulted anyone, he never lashed out, but the message was clear. There was no reconciliation, no shared nostalgia, no warmth. People who had worked on the show began to speak more openly about the rift. Some called it pride. Others said it was a fundamental clash in values. But those closest to Carroll believed it was something deeper, a sense of being discarded, of helping someone rise to success only to be forgotten once they reached the top. As the years passed, the silence became the story itself. Two men who had shared the spotlight, who had helped create one of the most impactful shows in television history, now lived like strangers. The final word. Years passed, the world moved on, television evolved, audiences changed, and the legacy of All in the Family became part of pop culture history. Yet for Carroll O'Connor, some wounds never quite healed. He rarely spoke about the past unless someone asked directly, and even then he chose his words very carefully. But when he did reflect on those years, the absence of one name was deafening. During a televised interview in the 1990s, Carroll was asked if he missed working with his former cast. His face shifted slightly, just enough for VA. He smiled gently and said, "Some of them, yes." When asked specifically about the on-screen son-in-law who had shared so many scenes with him, Carroll paused. "The boy did a good job," he said. That was it. No name, no warmth, just the boy. To most viewers, it may have seemed like an odd choice of words, but for those familiar with Carroll, it spoke volumes. He wasn't a man who forgot names. He was deliberate and precise, and when he chose not to name someone, it was intentional. It was his way of saying, "I have nothing more to say." Privately, friends said Carroll still felt betrayed, not by anything criminal or scandalous, but by something far more personal. He believed his co-star had used All in the Family as a stepping stone only to later discredit the show's heart, and, by extension, its leading man. He felt erased, like the years they spent building one of television's most powerful duos had been swept under the rug. Even during late-night talk show appearances and industry events, Carroll never broke. If the name came up, he would nod politely and shift the conversation. He once said to a colleague off camera, "There's nothing to be said that I haven't already decided not to say." It wasn't spite, it was a boundary, one he never crossed. Several colleagues later confirmed what many suspected. Carroll never truly forgave what he saw as a rewriting of their shared history. Not only had the respect vanished, but so had any acknowledgement of their partnership. It wasn't about ego, it was about legacy. Carroll had poured his soul into the show, into the character, into the message. Watching someone walk away from that while downplaying the role he played cut deeper than most fans realized. To Carroll, it wasn't just about professional differences or creative disputes. It was about loyalty, gratitude, and the sense that when everything was said and done, he had been left behind. But even in his final interviews, he never lashed out. He never told the full story. He let the silence speak for him. The end of silence. Carroll O'Connor's final years were marked by grace, resilience, and quiet reflection. He had battled personal heartbreak, including the tragic loss of his son, and endured health struggles that slowly dimmed his public presence. But through it all, he remained a symbol of strength for fans who had grown up watching him. When news broke of his passing in June 2001, tributes poured in from across the entertainment world. Actors, directors, and producers all lined up to share their memories. Norman Lear, Gene Stapleton, and countless others honored the man who had brought so much depth to Archie Bunker. But one voice was noticeably absent. Carroll's most well-known co-star remained silent. Days passed, then weeks. No tribute, no statement, no public appearance at the funeral. For fans hoping to see a final show of respect, the silence was impossible to ignore. Some believed the choice was personal, an act of quiet mourning. Others saw it differently. To them, it was the final confirmation that the rift between these two men had never healed. Not in life, not in death, not even in legacy. The funeral itself was a modest but heartfelt event attended by close family, longtime friends, and several television icons. Nearly everyone who had worked with Carroll spoke of his kindness, his professionalism, and his fierce loyalty. But as the service unfolded, many couldn't help but notice the empty space where his former co-star might have sat. Years later, documentaries about All in the Family began appearing. Retrospectives looked back on the cultural weight of the show, the cast chemistry, and the boldness of its storytelling. Carroll's name was celebrated, his influence acknowledged. Yet once again, his former co-star kept his distance. While others praised Carroll's commitment, his genius, and his kindness, there was no extended commentary from the man who had once stood by his side in nearly every episode. When asked in later interviews about All in the Family, Carroll's former co-star spoke in broad terms, never mentioning Carroll by name, never offering the kind of tribute fans had hoped for. It wasn't angry or bitter, it was just empty. That emotional distance left a lasting impression, as if those shared years had been quietly boxed away, no longer part of the narrative he wanted to carry. A legacy of silence. Carroll O'Connor gave the world one of the most iconic characters in television history. Archie Bunker was more than just a role. He was a lightning rod, a mirror to the times, and a vessel through which Carroll poured truth, vulnerability, and sharp wit. Millions laughed with him, argued about him, and saw themselves reflected in him, whether they wanted to or not. But Carroll was more than the man behind Archie. He was a deeply thoughtful artist, a proud father, and someone who valued loyalty above all else. That's what made the fracture with his co-star so painful, not just for him, but for those who admired their on-screen magic. Their chemistry had never been fake. It was real, their timing was perfect, and they brought something to life that couldn't be rehearsed. That's what made the silence afterward so striking. There was no dramatic feud played out in headlines, no scandal, no explosive interviews, just absence. Two men who had once shared a stage, shared history, and shared greatness never spoke of one another again. Not warmly, not fondly, not at all. And maybe that's what makes it all the more tragic, because the story of All in the Family wasn't just about a family. It was about people trying to understand one another across a divide. In real life, that understanding was never reached. Carroll never named him, not in interviews, not in speeches, not even in passing. He allowed the silence to speak in his place. Perhaps in doing so, he preserved his dignity. Perhaps he knew that some stories are best left unfinished. The one person Carroll O'Connor never forgave was someone he once shared the spotlight with, someone who helped shape one of the most unforgettable shows ever made. Yet when the lights dimmed, there was no handshake, no closure, no final word, just distance, just quiet. Sometimes the greatest stories are not the ones told in full, but the ones we are left to wonder about. The mystery of who Carroll O'Connor could never forgive remains one of television's most intriguing untold stories, a reminder that even the closest partnerships can fracture in ways that time cannot heal.